This is 0 to 100 blue, phase 1, day 1. This is the lion leg curl, okay? Limog, you can hop in there. So this is an exercise you'll find on an awful lot of our programs, nearly all of them. Lion leg curl, seated leg curl, or Nordic falls. It's nearly on every single day, and they work the hamstrings in a very similar way. So you can start your set there. So 2 or 3 main coaching points with the lion leg curl. The first sounds very simple, but you want to make sure that your hips are in the right place. A lot of people, when they're doing leg curls, they have their hips too far forward or too far back. And it's a very simple mistake, but it stops you from being able to bend your knees as much as possible, which is the whole point of the lion leg curl, the isolation of the hamstrings. You need to be able to bend your knee as much as possible. The second thing is to use full range of motion. If you're in the right position, you should be able to use full range of motion and to get the pad all the way up and touch the hamstrings or your heels as close as possible to your ass. So squeeze up and nice and slow all the way down. And squeeze up hard, nice and slow all the way down. So third tip or coaching point will be to make sure that you train this exercise really, really hard. There's no risk of injury basically. Once you're in the fixed position, you're using full range of motion. You should be going really hard sets to failure at least once or twice. Use a warm-up set or 2, then 1 or 2 sets where you're really pushing the envelope and going to absolute failure. And often the first time I do a lion leg curl with most of my clients, they'll say they've never felt their hamstrings like that before. And it's just simply being in the right place, using full range of motion and pushing really, really hard. So your hamstring is the big strong muscle that's able for hard training. This is the V squat. So the whole purpose, you can hop in there, Limog. So the whole purpose of using a V squat, a hack squat, or even a kettlebell goblet squat is to practice going full range of motion. So it's far easier to use full range of motion. I can go. It's far easier to use full range of motion with machines and the goblet squat than it is the barbell squat. The barbell squat, while it's a great exercise, can be very difficult for some people to use full range of motion. So sometimes it's often not the best exercise, especially if you're new to the gym at the start and you have never done much squatting before. It's very, very rare that someone will be able to do full range of motion or even close to it. But if you have never been to the gym before, it's often common that you can use a very big range of motion on a goblet squat, a V squat, or a hack squat. So that's the main advantage of using those variations compared to a barbell, is the range of motion. So once you're into the machine, point your toes out a little bit, chest up, and just focus on bending the knees as much as possible and getting low as you can. So if you're brand new to the gym, you might only be getting half as low as Limog there, and that's fine to start with. You're just trying to keep the weight the same, get used, get the soreness out of the way in the first few weeks, get used to bending your knees under a load, and then start increasing the range of motion over time, especially when you couple it with hip flexor stretches and leg curls. This is the leg extension. So very simple movement. You can start there, Limog. And what you're really doing here is teaching your quads how to contract as hard as possible, so that when you go into more compound movements, the more important movements like Bulgarian split squats, squats and leg presses, your quads can handle being put under pressure. So a lot very similar to if you do isolation exercises for the biceps, triceps and shoulders, you're going to learn the compound movements for the upper body a lot better. If you want to learn the compound movements for the lower body, the RDLs, squats, Bulgarian split squats, doing things like leg curls, hip thrusts and leg extensions is going to make a big difference. So just kick up high as you can, and all the work is done at the end of the range of motion. So make sure if you have to go lighter with the weight, you go lighter with the weight and make sure you're getting all the way to the top. So this bottom range is easy, the top range is where the quads are working the hardest. And up and squeeze, and squeeze. And again, this one, like the leg curl, you can train it really, really hard, very, very safely. And the muscles can feel under a lot of pressure and burn a lot, even with not that much weight relatively. This is the seated leg curl. So you can start there, Limog. This is another basic movement that I love, and the machine element to it makes it very, very simple technique-wise. So just make sure, like most machines, that you start off in the proper position. If If you're a little bit too far forward or if you're sliding during the movement, what's going to happen is you're going to not be able to bend your knees as much as possible, which is the whole point of a leg curl. So make sure you're fixed in position, that the pad's holding you in place, and then you want to use full range of motion. So your hamstring is going to be at peak contraction as close as possible when you get your heels to your ass as close as possible. So kick as far back as you can and let it go up slowly. And if you can get really strong on this exercise and the lion leg curl and even the Nordic falls, your knees and your hips are going to be far healthier for your heavier sets of deadlifts and squats. So while the weight might not be moving a ton on either exercise because it's isolation, because it's a machine, unless you're a beginner, it still can have a big effect on how fast you make progress on squats and deadlifts. And a lot of the people who I progress very quickly on squats and deadlifts, the hamstring curl is the missing link in their program. This is the 45-degree back extension. So a big favorite I put on an awful lot of programs, especially at the start. Okay, so you can hop in there. So point your toes out a little bit. And that's the most important thing at the start of the movement, is to make sure you're set up properly, make sure your toes are pointing out a little bit and that your heels are pressed hard against the pad at the back. So once you get down to the bottom, good, and even lower at the bottom. So what we're trying to do is get the glutes into as much of a lengthened position as possible. So real low, real low, real low, and then thrust into the pad. So as you thrust into the pad and focus on pushing as hard as you can into the pad, you're going to feel your glutes contract really, really hard. So adding a weight for maybe 20 to 50% of your body weight for 15 to 20 reps is a very achievable goal for most people inside their first 3 to 6 months of training. So if you weigh 80 kg, you should be able to do 20 to 40 kg for 15 to 20 reps inside your first 6 months of weight training. And if you do that, your glutes, hamstrings, and lower back will be a lot stronger, which will make a huge difference to exercises like your barbell squats and your barbell deadlifts. So it's far easier for a beginner to learn how to contract their glutes and to work their lower back, glutes and hamstrings, their posterior chain, in a very controlled way with the 45-degree back extension than it is with an RDL, which is often very difficult to teach, especially if people are tight or weak in the posterior chain. Okay, one more, and up and squeeze. Good, hold on. This is the hack squat. So you can start there, you know. Big advantage of using a hack squat, a V squat or a kettlebell squat, is you can get a bigger range of motion. So real squat down low, bend the knees as much as possible, and all the way up. That's better, good. And with the hack squat, your spine isn't loaded like a barbell squat. So I'm obviously a big fan of the barbell squat, and I use it with most clients most of the time. But some people are just too tight, or they haven't got the flexibility or the range of motion required to make it a really effective exercise. So the hack squat, V squat, or the heel elevated goblet squat is a perfectly good option and can work the quads just as well. Remember, one of these squats done perfectly or done with really good technique is always going to be far more effective than doing a barbell squat with half range of motion or with poor technique. Okay, so another advantage of the hack squat is that you can train it to failure really, really safely, whether it's quite dangerous to train a barbell squat to failure, and it's not very safe at all, especially if you're a beginner, especially if you're new to the gym. So knees forward, drive to the heels, and push your knees forward, and drive to the heels. Excellent, well done. This is the double banded hip thrust. So, all right, you can start there. So it'll be hard to set up unless you have one of these benches, but if you do have one of these benches, it's very worth doing this exercise. So what I want you to do, Limo, is push your feet further apart, wider, and bring them forward a little bit more. Okay, so drive up, and this exercise is perfect for teaching people how to feel their glutes in a hip thrust. A lot of the time when people are starting off with a hip thrust and they've never done it before, they don't even feel it in their glutes. So if you want to know what it's like to actually feel your glutes burning or feel your glutes working, you might not be using a heavy weight with this exercise, but you can create a lot of tension because of the two bands. So you push one band out, you push your knees out as hard as you can. And that way, especially at the top, you're going to feel your glutes a lot. And then the other one is coming across here, so the tension obviously then is the highest at the top. The chin down, gazing straight forward. And at the top, you want your heels in line with your knees. Squeeze glutes, come down 3/4 of the way, and then thrust up hard and fast. And you always want to pause for at least a second or two at the top. And one more. Good. This is the leg press. So the most important part of the leg press at the start is making sure the setup is correct. And that's a lot of the time, it's mostly down to your foot position. So you'll see on this leg press, you have 3 different pads or placements, and all leg presses will have something like this. So point your toes out a little bit. We're not going to go for very high or very low, just a normal stance or a normal foot placement. Okay, and push up. And Lee Moog's range of motion there is very good because his flexibility is very good. So as you bend the knees as much as possible while your ass is sticking on the seat, and then drive through the heels as hard as you can. And so the first point, or the first main point, is keep your ass on the seat. And the second one that a lot of get wrong is don't lock out at the top. Because if you lock out at the top, you're going to put a lot of unnecessary stress on the knees. So grab the handles, squeeze them tight, and drive through the heels to the top. So another advantage of not locking out at the top is obviously you keep a lot more tension on the legs. So you can make the leg press a lot easier by bouncing, doing fast reps, by having a shorter range of motion, not going as low as you should be, or not keeping constant tension on the quads. But you want to keep it higher reps, 15 to 20, 12 at minimum, and really tough sets and drop sets. Keep constant tension on the quads and use it as a finisher rather than a main lift. And go.